Hello friend. I want to tell you about the Seat Leon car. Engines. In some markets, the 1.6 engine was sold with a factory gas installation. The power range of the petrol engines is 85 to 265 horsepower. Diesel engines are 1.6 TDI, 1.9 TDI and 2.0 TDI in versions with pump injectors or common rail system. Here the power range is smaller, because the weakest diesels reached 90 hydrogen phosphide, while the strongest 170 HP. In this video, we will focus on the FSI petrol engine, which can be considered a compromise between the desire to have a petrol engine and the costs of its operation. The TSI engines from the beginning of production suffered from childhood diseases, some of which have not been cured to this day. On the other hand, the 2.0 FSI engine is not as bad as it might seem. In addition, it presents very reasonable performance, offering the driver 150 HP and as much as 200 Nm of torque available from 3,500 revolutions per minute. It allows the Leon to accelerate in less than 9 seconds to 100 km per hour and ultimately to a speed of over 200 km per hour. It is satisfied with about 8 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers. The engine has 2 camshafts in the head and 16 valves. The abbreviation FSI comes from fuel stratified injection, or stratified mixture injection, or in common language direct petrol injection. The FSI engine was offered in the Seat Leon 2 until the facelift in 2009. It was later replaced by supercharged engines. The question remains, should we be afraid of it? What's broken? Let's start with the drive, because it seems the most interesting. Seat used several versions of the FSI engine with the same parameters, but different markings, codes. In general, the differences between them are not big, and the problems described here apply to all of them, only they differ in scale. The most common problem with FSI units is carbon buildup on and around the valves. Unfortunately, carbon buildup is unavoidable if the engine is completely factory-made and is used exactly as recommended by the manufacturer. What exactly is the problem? There are generally 2 reasons for carbon buildup. The first is crankcase ventilation and oil vapors. The second is economical driving at low revs. The first is partly due to the fact that users do not change the oil according to healthy principles, but, for example, every 20 to 30,000 kilometers. This is a very big mistake. After 10,000 kilometers, with the current quality of oils, even earlier, the oil almost completely loses its properties, turns into sludge and vapors, which later enter the engine via crankcase ventilation. Some recommend making a separator yourself. The quality of the fuel is also important. However, economical driving causes a very large amount of exhaust gases to return through the EGR valve to the intake system. In addition, low load results in the inability to burn their parts, and the lack of fuel flushing the intake only deepens the problem. The more dynamics, the greater the probability of a clean engine. But here, in turn, a second problem appears: excessive engine oil consumption. Engine oil consumption is normal during dynamic driving, and the common problems associated with it in TSI engines have been known for years. However, TSI units also use poor quality piston rings, which are actually a manufacturing defect. In FSI units, however, they are not as much of a problem as used engine oil, which affects the wear of the rings. However, it is not as big a problem as in supercharged TFSI engines. The FSI engine, however, has not been immune to manufacturing defects. The biggest one is the material from which the camshafts are made. The shafts wear out. It is worth knowing, however, that the FSI units also had a variable valve timing system, the variator of which requires good quality oil to work properly. And here we return to the previous topic: the circle closes. Of course, it is not the case that the blame for problems with FSI engines should be placed on users who do not take care of the engine oil. The manufacturer did not foresee the consequences of introducing the 15,000 km change intervals and did not adapt the engine to work on used engine oil. Some units had an interval of 30,000 km provided that long-life oil was used. If you want to enjoy relatively trouble-free operation, you need to change the oil no less frequently than every 10,000 kilometers. However, not all problems are related to the lubrication system. In FSI engines, the crankshaft position sensors and the knock sensors fail. Fortunately, the designers decided not to use a timing chain. A short chain only drives the balance shaft, which is placed in the oil pan. The timing chain appeared in TFSI engines. Apart from the drive units, nothing else will cause problems. The body is durable and well protected against corrosion. Seat offered 12-year protection. The only more serious drawback may be the tendency for the headlights to fog up. The interior is also durable, and only in cars with very high mileage can you find damaged upholstery. The suspension is durable and cheap to maintain. The front rubbers are replaced and the wishbone pins are unscrewed. The norm is of course the wear of the rubber stabilizer elements and links. In the rear axle, sometimes one of the short wishbones has to be replaced, because the supporting wishbone is very durable. Here, too, the stabilizer links are most often replaced. In the rear axle, the springs and shock absorbers are mounted separately, which reduces the cost of their replacement. It happens, however, that after a long mileage, the steering system with progressive power steering managed by electronics can become decalibrated. Its precise calibration can be ordered from a mechanic with the appropriate device. Not everyone knows about this, and after carrying out repairs to the front axle, they leave the system to its own devices. After several repairs, it does not work as it should. It is also worth remembering to adjust the rear toe in after repairs to the rear suspension. The Seat Leon 2 does not struggle with typical electrical and electronic faults. It is also difficult to talk about problems with the drivetrain or brakes. The Seat Leon 2, like all compact cars of the Vaj group, is relatively cheap to operate. Access to spare parts and qualified mechanics is huge. Substitutes are relatively cheap, and the relatively low failure rate has a positive effect on the image of the Leon. It is worth remembering, however, that this is a relatively young car and the risk of theft is still high. The bad news is that the 2.0 FSI engine is completely unsuitable for installing a gas system. Even if it is possible to choose the installation, it is not worth doing it, because it is the weakest point in the car anyway. Fuel consumption of 8 to 9 L, 100 km with average use, and below 7 L, 100 km on the route slightly increases operating costs, but the Leon rewards you with good performance. The Seat Leon 2 is a very successful compact car that can be bought cheaper than a Golf and have almost the same thing. You should expect a greater drop in value, but in the case of pre-facelift cars it is not as big. The 2.0 FSI engine is a good source of power, especially for those who do not want to install a gas installation. It is dynamic and relatively economical, and at the same time it remains one of the most refined direct injection engines on the market. Unlike other, less common units of this type, mechanics are not afraid of FSI repairs. If the car is regularly serviced, and you change the oil no less often than every 10,000 kilometers, while filling up with good fuel, unexpected and very expensive repairs are avoidable. Of course, the better choice will be the Leon with the 1.6 TDI or 1.9 TDI engine. If you are afraid of the FSI, choose one of these two engines, and if you can afford a bigger expense, the best choice will be the 2.0 TDI CR. It is worth looking for special versions and nice body styling packages, not necessarily available only in the FR or Cupra versions. Thanks for listening to me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate my video. If you know of any problems with this car that I haven't mentioned, be sure to write about them in the comments.
I have good news for you. Now, if you are planning to buy a used car, or learn more about your car, you no longer need to search for the information you need on the internet. We have collected everything in one place for you, on the website carme.pro. Here you can find out everything about the car, what breaks and at what mileage, any problems with engines, chassis or gearboxes, which trim levels are better not to mess with, and how not to lose money buying a used car. You will learn all this on carme.pro.